Oh, thanks. It's like you're on pause then. That's cool. Don't worry. Oh, who watched the Six Nations rugby? Neil did. Tell me yesterday. Tell me this morning, sorry. Six Nations rugby? Some blank faces in the room. Rugby. It's like American football, but for real men. That's funny. They don't wear the pads or anything like that. The hits aren't quite as big, but you get beaten up a lot. But it's, my old sport I used to play before I was broken. And there was a tournament called the Six Nations Tournament yesterday. And it was all coming to a head. It's not like a knockout tournament. They all play each other. So by the end of the last round, like 3 teams could possibly win it this time round. And so it was right down to the wire. Ireland were going to be winning it. And then the next game played with England, and we won it. And so we were in the top of the table, and then France come along and beat Scotland, which means we didn't win. So I'll be honest, I actually turned it off 10 minutes before it finished. It's like, rubbish, flipping French beating us again. Oh, love the French. But I'll tell you what I did do whilst watching it, was to grip the remote control. Who knows what I'm talking about? I've got 4 kids, which means 4 little bums that come and sit near me all the time. And so I grip the remote control. So I've learned my lesson over 14 years of having children, that if I leave it anywhere, their bum will sit on it. And that's fine on a normal program, but on live sport, especially ITVX, if you pause it or back out on an Amazon Fire Stick, it goes, oh no, I can't remember where you are. And you've got to watch the adverts again. And so you miss like 10 minutes of the game. So I gripped that remote, wasn't letting it down, mine. And so who else is a remote control freak? In fact, let's just take a little survey. If you're married in here, whether your partner's here or not, which of you holds the remote control? It's quite an even split, actually. It's about 50-50 across the sexes there. I thought it would be a male-dominated remote control gripping scenario here. I thought that was going to be the case, but it's not. But in my house, I'm the remote control holder. Because otherwise, like, Steph puts on Call the Midwife or something like that, and that won't abide in my house. She watches it in another room, actually. But, like, she does. And so I'm the remote control holder. I like control of the remote. And so to the point, sometimes I'll hold it even when we're not watching television. Just in case. You never know. But I hold the remote, and like Steph gets a bit angry with me because maybe you're like me. If you're a remote control holder, we have a Fire Stick as well on our TV. And so, like, when we come to watch a movie, which we've started doing again now, we've just started watching movies again, like 14 years of not having time, and we're starting. It takes us 3 days to watch them, but we take a little segment at a time, and then the kids interrupt and stuff. But we get through a movie in 3 or 4 days, smashed it out. And when we're choosing a movie, some of you spend the whole night choosing a movie on Netflix, right? And then you spend an hour and a half and then go, oh, what's the point? We might as well not watch. But me, I'm a fast clicker. Anyone a fast clicker? So I'm on Netflix and I'll be going ding, 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 ding. And she's like, how can you read that fast? She's like, I can't even see the movies. And I say, don't worry, dear, I can tell. Because I like doing this scan thing. I scan and then I go ding, 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 ding. And then I scan. And I'm looking for old movies that I like. I go by the picture. She wants to read all the blurb and stuff. But I like choosing because I like being in control of the remote control. Maybe you're like me. But it got me thinking about this concept. And this old movie. It's an amazing movie. I've only watched it once. And it's probably a rubbish movie, but I like the concept of it. Has anyone seen Click? Okay. I haven't seen it for years, and probably when it first came out, but I like the idea, the concept of having a remote control that controls life. If you haven't seen the movie, I can't spoil it for you because I can't even remember the ending. But it lets him rewind and pause and fast forward his life. And who's ever wanted a life remote like that? Come on. You can say something stupid, and you can rewind, or... Come on, I think we've got a picture of the remote. Here it is. Look at that. Fantastic. And so you said, so Tony, I heard you shouted out mute. And the assumption there, his wife thinking that meant for his wife. Did anyone else pick that up? Not generally for anyone else, but just for the wife. That is rude. I would never have already written that in my notes. I wasn't specific about Kaylee. But like, perhaps for Kaylee, perhaps not, because Tony's got OCD and loves cleaning. But for some of you, perhaps you might think, I'd like the fast forward button. Why my husband takes 4 hours to unload a dishwasher. And you're like, when my son, and my wife would love a fast forward button for Joel when he's doing the dishwasher or doing a chore. Just put him on fast forward. I like the idea of having this remote. But today I want to talk about how we use our life remote, if you like. And are we stuck rewinding? Are we stuck pausing or fast forwarding when God actually calls us to press play and live fully in the present? And so I want to look at that idea today, because I think there's lots of buttons on a remote, but there's 3 buttons that get misused a lot, I think, which I'm going to talk about today. And so I'm going to focus firstly on the rewind button. Rewind. Living in the past. And so some of you, perhaps in your remote control that you grip of your life, perhaps your finger or thumb is firmly placed on the rewind button, and you're living in the past, and you're always looking back. And there's some great scriptures around this, but I'm going to probably read one that you weren't expecting. So I'm going to read from John 5, 1 to 13, and I'm reading from the NLT today. It's my new favorite translation. It says this: Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city near the sheep gate was the pool of Bethesda. And this pool name's got lots of different names. It's got like 6 or 7 different names, depending on what translation you read. But it has 5 covered porches. And crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. That is, oh man, when we got man flu, that's like 2 weeks, but 38 years. His condition he'd had all that time. And it says, when Jesus saw him and he knew he'd been ill for a long time, he asked, I love this, Jesus comes and asks him, would you like to get well? If anyone ever asks me that when I'm sick or I've got a condition or I'm hurt, or if anyone asks me that, the answer would be, yeah. Yeah, I'd like to get well. But notice what this man does, who'd been sick for 38 years. And that's an important detail. For a long period of time, these patterns of behavior are built up. And it says this, verse 7. It says, I can't, sir, the sick man said, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me. Now, to bring context to this pool was known for bringing healing. And so when the waters bubbled up, people would get into the water and there'd be some miraculous healing of their body. And so there are people who are lame and sick, and maybe you'd be the same. I want to be there waiting, ready for when this happens, so I can embrace this miracle of God. And so I'm going to be sat on the porch waiting and ready, but so many of them are so sick that they can't even move. They're paralyzed. They can't walk. And this gentleman was saying this to Jesus, explaining the reason why I haven't been able to be healed yet. Because Jesus didn't say, why haven't you been healed yet? He said, do you want to be healed? Do you want healing? And the man said, let's read it again. He says, I can't, sir. I can't. The sick man said, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me. You see, his frame and his thought process is that he's living in rewind. This is what's happened, perhaps for 38 years. We don't know how long he's been waiting in that particular location. But the pattern of behavior, what's happened over and over again in my life, was this. And Jesus is coming and saying, do you want something different? And he said, I can't because of this. He's living in rewind. He's looking at what's happened and patterns of behavior in the past. And perhaps that's a really smart thing to do in lots of areas of life. We should perhaps to be able to guess what's going to happen or predict what happens in the future. But Jesus was coming and trying to reframe and challenge him. And it says this, verse 8 says this, Jesus told him, I love this, stand up, pick up your mat and walk. Jesus didn't say, don't worry, next time it bubbles up, I'll be here, or I'll leave one of my disciples and we'll get you in the water so you can experience this miracle, because this is the way it's always been done. No, Jesus said, all right, that's cool, that's how it happens, and that will continue to happen maybe when we leave. But I'm telling you, don't worry about that. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Instantly, it says in verse 9, the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. Check this, though. But this miracle happened on the Sabbath. It wasn't just this sickly man who was living in Rewind. It was also the Jewish leaders. It says in verse 10, so because it happened on the Sabbath, so the Jewish leaders objected. Imagine that. Someone's been healed from 38 years of whatever condition, and because you're so godly and righteous that you have a problem with it. And maybe we're being a bit harsh on the Jewish leaders, but they said to the man, "Who cured you? You can't work on the Sabbath." It says they said to the man who was cured, "You can't work on the Sabbath. Picking up your mat and walking is working on the Sabbath." The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat. But he replied, "The man who healed me told me, pick up your mat and walk." And they said to him in verse 12, "Who said such a thing as that?" They demanded. They're angry that someone would demand that. And verse 13 says, the man didn't know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. And so he'd been stuck there for 38 years waiting for healing, but believing it could only come through one method, through getting in the water, through what had happened in the past. It's like that was his only understanding of how this could work. And so he lived in that pattern, and you can understand that. But when Jesus asked, "Do you want to get well?" instead of saying yes, the man blamed his past failures or blamed other people because they would push in or there was no one to help him. It was like the victim mentality of like everything's fallen apart and that's where I'm living and that's where I'm going to live forever. That's what he'd settled on. Have you noticed that? Do you want to be healed? He didn't say, yeah, but people keep getting in front of me in the queue. He said, I can't because people keep getting in front of the queue. He'd already settled his future based on his past. He was living in rewind, which meant that determined what would happen going forward. And Jesus come and challenged that framing. He come and said, stop living with the rewind button down and press play. I'm telling you, there's a different way. Press play. Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. He was focused on what hadn't worked before, instead of recognizing this new opportunity that was standing in front of him. Jesus come a new thing. He was a new way. The way. And Jesus challenged his whole premise of how he believed and understood things. And I read this story, and then I was like, you know what? The Jewish leaders were just as bad. The Pharisees and Sadducees and all the Jewish leaders, Jesus challenged over and over again. But in this particular story, the Jewish leaders at the time were just as bad. They were stuck in the past, in a misinterpretation of the Jewish Sabbath law that Jesus was coming and challenging. He was like, you're telling people, even when we're going to heal them, that they can't pick up their mat. You're telling people they can't dig their sheep out of a thing. You're living in rewind the way it's always been done in tradition and religion. You're misinterpreting this thing, this godly thing, this good thing that God's given us. You're twisting, and because there's been patterns of it for generations, that's what you're copying. You're just living in rewind. But Jesus was doing something new that day. They were stuck in rewind, living in the past. And it's such a waste of time. And like I said, we can perhaps be a bit harsh because we know the end of the story. And so, like, perhaps we would think we'd do something different, but perhaps in some ways we don't. Perhaps in our own little way of life, we're holding down the rewind button. And Jesus, you've got to remember at this time, this was a whole new Jesus thing that was happening. This hit the Jewish leaders like a smack in the face. Even though there was lots of things telling them it was coming. It was right now, and there was a big change happening. So you can perhaps understand. But we've had that new way of Jesus for thousands of years, and yet still we reach for the remote and still press rewind and live in the patterns of behavior that we've grooved out either by our family or our church culture or generally in culture. And we can live in that rewind. And it's such a waste of time. Who remembers, who's old enough in here to have, you would have had one because he was a posh boy growing up. He went to posh school. I went to a really low level. Actually, I bet you didn't this because you had money. I bet you had a Walkman. I didn't. I had a cheap copy of a Walkman. I don't know what it was called, like a Jog Girl or something. It was rubbish. But I bet you had a Walkman, and I bet your parents bought you batteries enough that you could use the rewind button. Not me, I come from a poor background. Anyone do this? You take the tape player out that had songs on it, you'd put a biro in it, and then you'd spin it. You've done a really, Josh just done this. That's the slow way of doing it. That's old school. That's like, you got to embrace the new way, mate. This is I'm going back 25, 30 years. You put it in the air and you can spin it around all the way and you can rewind it all the way back to the beginning in only 4.5 hours. But it wasted my time and my life. You probably just pressed the button. Nowadays, you can just skip it back. Oh, I want to listen to that song again. Because I'm the sort of person, if I get a song in my head, I listen to that song over and over and over again to death. I love it until I go I hate this song, and then I pick a new song. And so as a teenager, I just rewind the song, put it back in. I'd rewind the song and put it back in. But some of us do that with our life. We live in the past, either in a trauma, in a thing that happened in a way that we want it to be. Like we talked about nostalgia the other week, of looking back and thinking, oh, I wish it was like that, and living in that past. And so just like it's a waste of life, always listening to the same song over and over again and rewinding over and over again. It's a waste of life living in rewind. Imagine if we'd done that in our life as a Walkman. You'd never hear the next song. What a boring life. You'd never hear the next song, and so it is with what God's calling us to do in our life. If we live in rewind all the time, if that sick man just stayed and lived in rewind, he'd be in the same place, sat at that porch, maybe even today. We can learn from the past, but we can't live there. And God is calling us forward, and so I want to say, look at the past. Even learn from the past. We shouldn't be staring back at the past like Paul talks about, but we can learn from the past. We can even love the past. We can have fond memories of the past, the good bits of the past. But don't live in it. Maybe you're holding down that button. Then we come on to probably the most overused button in life. And I don't mean just for Christians, but I mean for anyone on the planet, and I think it's the pause button. Living only for the now. And that's what pause is, isn't it? It's like this snippet in a movie. If you pause it, I liked it in the old VHS days. Some of you younger people won't know about this. When you pause the movie, they carry on moving somehow. They'd be flinching. When you pause now, it's dead still. It's wow, it's like witchcraft years ago. And so now, the pause button is the easiest button to push, because it's often, some remotes, the same as the play button. And so we're even pushing the play button, but we're actually pausing. And what I want to talk about for this moment is this living only for the now. And this culture is more and more like this. And if we're not careful in church culture and Christian culture, we can get swept along into that and dragged along into that of living only for now, only for this moment. And there's a difference between living in the present, and we'll get to that. But perhaps some of you hold this. Perhaps we all do in some regard. Perhaps the easiest button to push. The button most of us are most tempted to push, even if we don't act on it. Because it's so easy, that immediate feedback loop in life, that right now thing. It's right now, I get the feedback, whatever it is I'm trying to get, good or bad, I get it right now. That pause, that moment, right now. That's why we eat that thing. That's why you drink that thing, watch that thing, say that thing, hit that thing, steal that thing, ignore that thing, react to that thing, whatever it is. So often it's because it's right now and what I want right now, living in the now. It's like living on pause just for that very moment. And it's easy because of that immediate feedback of often pleasure. There's an interesting story in Genesis 25 about an individual not being able to do this delayed gratification. It's something that we should probably talk about more and more in our culture, not just in the church, but delaying gratification. It's that's why you go to work. It's I give up this time for this thing in the future that is this money that might be able to open up other doors. And we should be able to do that with many, many, many different things. And one person in the Bible struggled to do that. and his name was Esau, Genesis 25, reading from verse 29. And it says this: one day when Jacob was cooking some stew, who was Esau's brother, Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. And Esau said to Jacob, I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew. He was a very polite man. And this is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. And it says this: and Jacob, who's a very conniving sort of fella, said, all right, Jacob. Jacob replied, but trade me your rights as your firstborn son. I want you to give up your inheritance, your birthright, which is a massive deal. It'd be like your section of your inheritance. It's different in today's culture. It's an even bigger thing here. But imagine you got a sibling and you go in and they're cooking something and you go, hot dogs, gives a hot dog. And he said, all right, but I'll sell it for half of mum and dad's house that I'm due in the future, that you're due, for one hot dog. Some of you are like, deal. Hardly any of us would make that deal. Maybe if we were really hungry, we might. Or starving, because it says he was starving, but I don't think he was starving. But that innate, that thing in us that's like that immediate gratification of pleasure, of need right now, of living only for now, affected Esau. Trade me your right as the firstborn son. Look, I'm dying of starvation, said Esau. What good is my birthright to me now? No forward thinking, nothing in the future, just what good is that? I want some soup now. But Jacob said, first you must swear that your birthright is mine. So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob. Imagine that. We look at that and we think, you're dumb, you idiot. Why would you do that? And yet so many areas of our life, we press the pause button. The thing that we want right now takes over anything that could happen in the future. All the plans and purposes in God and in what you should do in your family life, in your work life, in your marriage. It's like, don't care about any of that right now because it's not right now. And we're living on pause. He lived for the moment, trading his future inheritance for a bowl of stew. I don't even like stew. He paused his long-term vision for short-term gratification. Living in this instant gratification, it's more and more in our culture, like I said, only caring about the next thing, the thing right now, the next paycheck, the next thrill, the comfort I can have right now. So focused on this very moment that we ignore the known. This is the thing. We ignore the known long-term outcomes, even for ourselves. And I thought this is so weird that we'll make decisions for ourselves, that even in the moment we know, I'm going to regret this tomorrow, and we somehow disconnect ourselves from tomorrow, from who we are. We think that's like an avatar, that's like a someone else of the future. And then we get there and we think, oh, my yesterday was so stupid. Why would they make that decision? I'll do it again. We separate our future self like it's not ourself somehow. It's ridiculous that we can do this when it's the right thing that's tempting us. And we'll all be different for all of us, that we're tempted to push that pause button for. Someone wants milk, I think. Wants immediate gratification. What a baby. It's actually a speaker. I asked him to play that at that time. But we understand that's a baby and they want immediate gratification for that need they have now, and yet we walk that out in so many ways. And Jesus said, I think it's in John 10, about, I've come that you may have life, and life to the full. And we like that Jesus would give us life to the full, but some of us twist those words to mean like the YOLO phrase, YOLO, you only live once. And so I need to live to the full right now in this moment. Like, you only live once, so let's do it now, because who knows for the future, so let's do it now. I want that now. And that's, you notice that it's YOLO, you only live once, not you only live now. It's you only live once, so the decisions you make now, you're going to have to live with forever. So why not make some good ones now? Because you only live once. Another take on this pause is maybe, because maybe you don't relate to that at all, but another take on it is being spiritually stagnant, like on pause. Just existing instead of growing in faith, that you've sort of hit a plateau that you're comfortable with. So I want to challenge you. Are you pressing pause in areas of your faith, in areas of relationship, in areas of calling? Or are you often tempted to press pause on the things of life because you want them right now? The last button I want to talk about, or the three of the misused, is the fast forward button. This is my button. I think I'm not too bad with the other two buttons. This is my button. This is my button that's, I think, worn out. You know, on your remotes at home, that sometimes the pictures on the front worn out. You can see which ones you press a lot because they wear out, like the play button on our Netflix thing on the remote where the kids push it, or it's sort of worn. And on my remote of life, this one, you can barely see the fast forward, that I push it so much. In fact, I'd probably hold it and rub it because it won't go quick enough. You know, when you watch and trying to skip through things that you've seen before or whatever, and you can times like 3 little arrows, and I'm like, that's still too slow. This is my button. This one's my problem. Like I said earlier, I change channel fast when I'm with Steph, when we're going through movies. Bing, 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 bing. But I'll be honest with you, I live in times 2. I do, and some of you relate to this, where you're a fast ticker and you're like always constantly thinking of the next thing. Always in a rush. I'm always in a rush. Like, I have to make myself sit down and talk and be present before I'm like, right, go. When I watch YouTube videos, I love podcasts. Actually, I don't watch them. I listen to them, usually at the gym. But like, if there's someone who talks at a normal human pace, I have to turn up the speed on YouTube. Some of you don't even know you can do this. I want to go 1.5 times. Nope, still too slow. 2 times. Hurry up, chop, let's go. Give me the information. I hate going to meetings. Like, we run the local food bank. We go up to Trust and go to meetings, and there might be someone giving a presentation, and they're really, really, really slow at talking. And I've already read all their slide before they've even got to their first point. And that's the way I am. I tick like that. I live on fast forward. And it's funny, if you're wired like me, and I know there's a few in the room, I know a few of you who are definitely like this. We look at other people, and it's like, it's like you're on half speed. It's like, I don't understand. Finish your story. I've finished your story for you in my head, and mine's a better version. But more often than not, because of that, because of my nature, because I'm wired like this, and I'm not saying it's all bad, but because of that, I find myself living in the future. That's what I do. I find myself living in the future. Some of you can't think about this. It's not the way you're wired, but it's almost like I'm living in the future in my mind all the time. And some of you thinking, oh, that's very organized of you and planning. And it is good. It has its upsides, believe me, because I plan to death, and it makes life very easy in lots of ways. But, it's such a shame. I catch myself fast forwarding all the time, planning the next thing, even while I'm doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing now. For instance, I'll be on holiday in Florida. We went a couple of years ago, and I was pen and paper planning out next time's holiday, which will be 2 years' time, which we're going on in a few months. And what it means is that holiday ends up running really well and smooth, but I miss out on the holiday that I'm supposed to be on. I'm not enjoying, part of the fun is the planning process, and so I get lost in fast forward in the future and don't actually even appreciate today. And some of you I know looking at me like, what are you talking about? I can't plan tomorrow. And in my mind, I can be talking to you, and I'm planning tomorrow. I'm planning 10 years, sometimes 20, 30 years in my head of things, of the permutations of things that could happen if this, and it's really sad and busy in my brain. But because of that nature that I have, I'm always living in the future. Even my internal monologue, we talked about it at our Connect group a few weeks ago, and Sally asked the question about, do you guys have an internal monologue? Because some of you don't. Like you said about the man thing the other week of just nothing. I don't have that. I don't have that just quiet in my head like some of you, particularly you men in the room, have, where it's just like white noise. Mine is bouncing around all the time. And we talked about it, and it's like, Sally was saying, does your brain say, I'm going to pick up the cup, and you're doing this internal monologue, this narration all the time. And I was like, yeah, I do, yeah. And then I thought about it later, and I was like, no, I don't. Not about what I'm doing now. I'll be doing them things, but I'm planning something else that's in the future as a narrative. And so I'm living there, even whilst I'm busy doing something. I could be having a conversation with you, my brain's somewhere else planning the future. And it's I'll be honest, I struggle to live in the now, to enjoy today, because I'm living in the future. And like I said, it has its upsides, but it has its downsides. And maybe some of you are like this, and Jesus warned about it in one area, when you take it to the extreme, or it's extreme in one area. Let's read as a warning from Luke 12, 16 to 21, particularly talking about financial sides, but there's other costs that come with this. And it says this, then he told them a story. Lovely. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, what should I do? I don't have room for all my crops. What a great problem to have. Then he said, I know, I'll tear down my old barns and I'll build bigger ones. Then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. He's like planning like all the way to his retirement. And some of that's good when done in moderation, in its proper place, like we talked about last week, in fact. But like his whole system was built around this, it looked like. And it says this, but God said to him in verse 20, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but have no rich relationship with God. And there's lots of lessons to this story. One about, being selfish and wanting and not being rich to the kingdom and God and all sorts of things. But yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth. Storing it up for future. It's like I'm taking care of myself for the future. That seems reasonable and smart, but not have a rich relationship with God, like now. It's like I'm storing that stuff up for the future. It's like, I bet this person's even like, I'll be really rich now, and I'll set myself up so I'm comfortable. Then, in the future, I can be really generous. Yeah, you're kidding yourself. You can think and prepare for the future. I think it is a good idea, but not at the expense of living in today. You can live in your fictitious proposed dream future and miss out on God's will and purpose for you today. If you think, maybe you've been caught in this before, you live in your future self, you're holding the fast forward button down of saying, like, with my relationship with God, of having a rich relationship with God, I'll do that tomorrow. My future self, they'll be more mature. They'll be the ones who'll sort that out. I'm sure down the line somewhere I will do that. And what we're doing when we do that is that we're actually living with the fast forward button, thinking that you in the future, when you're older, are going to make different decisions than you now. Instead of living today and building a rich relationship with the creator of the universe today, so that you can have that in play mode, not at some time in the future. This particular dude in this story, he stored up earthly wealth and planned for his future security, but forgot to live in the present with God. That's the whole point of the story. It's like you're planning all this for your future, but you're not living with me right now. And Jesus says you're a fool because of that. Because he prepared for a future that never came. And that's something that I do all the time. I prepare for all these different futures that might never come. And because I prepare so many permutations, it's inevitable that most of them don't come to pass. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you're like me. We can live in the future in so many ways. Maybe for you it's in a different way. A great example is in anxiety or worry, like we talked about in the Inside Out series the other week. We can be worried and be anxious about stuff. All that is you living in fast forward of what might happen. And Jesus was really clear in Matthew 6, I think it is, where he says, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself. There's enough worrying tomorrow for tomorrow. Us fast forwarding life, holding down that button, often comes from fear. Fear of not having enough, fear of failure, fear of whatever's next. And in doing so, we miss out on today. And It's like skipping ahead in a movie. I don't do that with a movie because there's a narrative you've got to follow. I might do it with podcasts or something like that. It's like, I'm bored of this bit. But with a movie, you can't do it, can you? Because you'll miss out on something important. But when we do this in our life, it's like skipping ahead in a movie. You might reach the end, but you've missed all the meaningful moments on the way. I think about that with my kids. I plan so much for their future in my head and the decisions I make that so often I miss out on them right now. Planning is good, but not at the cost of missing out what God is doing now. And so as I finish up, your remote of life. Do you hold rewind too much? Do you hold the pause too much? If instant stuff adjusts now? Or do you, like me, hold the fast forward too much? Perhaps the better question is the question that I asked at the beginning, and that is really, who's holding the remote? Are we giving God the control? Or are we trying to always press the buttons like my little ones? Are we trying to rewind bits, skip bits? Because God's design, I think, is to press play and live fully in the present. And that's really difficult for me to say. To press play and live fully in the present. Because before I used to, I think, misinterpret perhaps this scripture in Philippians that Paul wrote to the church. And he said in Philippians 3, "No, dear brothers and sisters, I've not achieved it." And you can read what that's about. "But I focus on this one thing." He said, forgetting the past. That doesn't mean you can't learn from it and look at it. But like forgetting what's happened, he says, and looking forward to what lies ahead. Why do I like this one? Because it resonates with me so much naturally. I've got to look at what lies ahead. That's all I'm doing. That's been my life, I guess. It's always looking ahead. But then it says, verse 14, I press on. I press on. I press play. I press on to reach the end of the race. Not, I'm living there, not I've arrived, because he says I haven't even arrived yet. What he's saying, I'm stopping looking the way I've come from, and I'm looking ahead, and now I'm pressing on. I'm now in play mode. I'm plodding on in the direction that God set out for me, for my purpose, not just living in some fictitious future of just hopefulness. Even though we should have all that, we should be walking it out in real time. It says, I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. Press on, for me, means press play. Like I've always read this of just focus on the future, but it's not. It's like orientate yourself to the future, but walk out today's stuff. Press play, living in today, but in motion, in the correct speed, in times one, Phil. Walk it out in times one, not in times two, not skipping ahead. You can live it with regard to the future, with hope, with aiming at it, and maybe even allowing the past to inform you, but don't live in that future. Pressing on isn't about, and this so resonates with me. I don't even know why I'm talking to you guys. I should just read this in my bedroom to myself, but pressing on isn't about rushing into the future. It's about choosing to engage fully in what God has for you today in real time. And then time will pass at the rate that it should. Jesus was never in a hurry. He lived fully in the present. Whether spending time with children, people are like, hurry on, don't worry about it. No, I'm here. This is where I am now, so I'm here. I'm fully here. Or if he's pausing to heal the sick. And the disciples, we're on a deadline. We've got to be here. We've got to feed some people. And he'd be like, no, I'm taking a moment because I'm here in the now. Or whether he stops to share meals with sinners that other people are like, this is a waste of your time. He's like, I'm here, so I'm here. And maybe what I'm getting at is, even though I hate this phrase of balanced living, because I don't think we're ever in balance, and sometimes we're caused to be in imbalance for a time that might balance itself out across a lifetime. But what I'm suggesting is that we learn from the past but don't live there, that we trust God with the future but we don't obsess over it, and we avoid living on pause, only responding to immediate gratification, but that we press play and live fully in the present, because that's where God meets us. That's where he wants to meet you, is in the present, not in your fictitious future, where you're going to have some great relationship with God because you're going to sort all your stuff out. You know, a movie is meant to be watched scene by scene, not skipped, paused, or rewound. And I think life works in a similar way. And so my bottom line is, don't live in rewind. Don't get stuck on pause. Don't rush to fast forward, but press play and live fully in the present. So I want to challenge you. Is it time to put down the remote like me instead of gripping it? Is it time to stop rewinding and living in the past all the time? Is it time to stop pressing pause and living only for the now all the time? Or like me, is it to stop rushing to the future? Because I believe God is working in our present. Amen? Let's pray.